My husband once told me, "Don't come to my office party. It'll be awkward with my ex there." I remember the way he said it, too casual, too rehearsed, while knotting his tie in our bedroom mirror. I'd laughed it off, kissed his cheek, and said, "Of course, I'll stay home. Have fun." What he didn't know was that, by then, it wasn't his decision anymore. 2 weeks earlier, his boss had called me with an offer, regional director, overseeing my husband's department at Morrison & Associates. A lateral leap from construction management into corporate operations, with a generous salary and the kind of title that sounded like power in every room it entered. "We need someone who understands real work," Mr. Qley had said over the phone. "Someone who won't get caught up in office politics." If only he knew. By the time the Morrison & Associates Christmas party rolled around, I already had the offer letter signed and the onboarding paperwork completed. Nobody at the firm knew the new regional director was also Ethan Morrison's wife. Not Ethan. Not his beloved ex-girlfriend, who just happened to work in his department. Not the women whose perfume I could smell on his shirts when he came home late from client dinners. I walked into the lobby that night in a simple black dress and a coat I'd bought myself after my first big promotion years ago. The kind of coat you wear when you want to remind yourself you built your life with your own 2 hands. The elevator whisked me up to the 32nd floor, my reflection fractured in the mirrored walls, dark hair smoothed back, lipstick steady, eyes a little too bright. The doors slid open to a different world. The firm's conference floor had been transformed into something out of a glossy magazine spread. Twinkling fairy lights wrapped around steel columns. An ice sculpture in the shape of the firm's logo glowed in blue from underneath. Waiters floated by, with trays of champagne flutes, their shoes silent on the polished marble. Laughter and music blended into a low, expensive hum. And then I saw him. Ethan stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows in a navy suit I'd picked out for him last year, the one he always said made him feel like a partner already. His hand rested lightly on the small of a woman's back, tall, slim, perfectly highlighted hair falling over an elegant black cocktail dress. She was laughing at something he'd just whispered in her ear, her fingers curled around his forearm like she'd never let go. Clara. That name hit me like a shard of ice. I recognized him from the photo I'd found on Ethan's phone 2 weeks ago. Him and this woman, his ex from college, clinking champagne glasses at the Meridian Hotel. The same hotel that kept appearing on the credit card statements tied to an account I hadn't even known my husband had. He'd told me she meant nothing, that they were barely even friends anymore, that I was being insecure. From where I stood, watching my husband lean in a little too close, his smile a little too familiar, she didn't look like nothing. She looked like the center of his universe. "You must be the new regional director," a voice said beside me. I turned to find a petite blonde with sharp green eyes studying me like a puzzle she'd already started to solve. She held 2 champagne flutes, offering one to me with a practiced, effortless grace. "Sophie Martinez," she said. "I'm an associate here." I accepted the glass, fingers steady despite the way my heart was pounding in my ears. "Nice to meet you," I said. "I'm Ethan's wife," she finished calmly, her gaze flicking toward my husband and his ex by the window. I figured. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Sophie took a slow sip of champagne, then added, almost conversationally, "And for what it's worth, I was Chad's girlfriend, until about 5 minutes ago when I saw the photos on his phone." I felt the bubbles claw at my throat. Photos. Hotel selfies. Text messages, receipts. Her knuckles whitened around the stem of her glass, but her voice stayed level. "Apparently he's been very busy with married women in the firm." The ice sculpture glimmered across the room. My husband laughed at something his ex whispered, his hand drifting to her waist like it had been there 1,000 times before. And somewhere between Sophie's words and Ethan's touch, something inside me solidified. I hadn't come here tonight just as Ethan's wife. I'd come as his new boss. And I was done pretending I didn't know exactly what was going on. The microphone crackled as Mr. Qley's voice rose above the music. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention," he boomed, smiling broadly, "I'd like to introduce the newest member of our leadership team, our new regional director overseeing corporate litigation." The room slowly quieted, faces turning toward the makeshift stage. Ethan and his ex turned too, laughing, unaware, wrapped in the glow of their own little world. My world was about to crash straight into theirs. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. ready to let everything fall exactly where it deserved to. If you'd met us 3 years ago, you never would have guessed we'd end up here. Me in a cocktail dress at his office Christmas party, watching my marriage burn in slow motion under fairy lights. Back then we looked normal, solid even. I'm 34, a project manager in construction management, which sounds glamorous until you're standing in steel-toe boots at 6 a.m. on a muddy job site, arguing with a subcontractor about why the concrete pour cannot be just an inch off. I grew up in a working-class family where overtime meant you were lucky enough to still have a job, and tape measures and power drills were just part of the scenery. I liked building things, tangible things, walls that stood straight, floors that didn't creak, schedules that actually worked. Ethan was the opposite of everything I knew. We met at a friend's engagement party, one of those rooftop bars with candles and glass jars, and a string quartet playing pop songs like it was a joke only the rich understood. I'd gone straight from a site visit, still smelling faintly of dust and asphalt, my nails short and unpolished, my hair knotted into the kind of bun that said, "I did not have time for this." He was in a navy suit, laughing with a group of people who all seemed to know the right wine words. His tie was perfect, his smile even more so. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he'd said, suddenly at my elbow. I'd snorted. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who feels the same way." He held up his whiskey. "Ethan, corporate litigation, professional buzzword slinger." "Julia," I'd replied, "construction management. Professional person you call when your building is about to collapse because someone ignored a blueprint." He'd laughed, genuinely. "So you do the real work, and we argue over invoices afterward. Good to know." We spent the rest of the night in our own little corner, trading stories. Him about law school and billable hours, me about cranes and concrete cures. By the time the party ended, my cheeks hurt from smiling. He walked me to my car, hands buried in his coat pockets against the wind. "Can I see you again?" he'd asked, suddenly shy. And I'd said yes. The first year with him felt like someone had cracked a window open in a stuffy room I didn't know I was trapped in. He'd bring me coffee to my site on cold mornings. I'd pack him lunches when he had late hearings. We'd fall asleep on the couch watching terrible reality TV, his head on my lap, my fingers in his hair. When he landed the job at Morrison & Associates, he'd spun me around the kitchen, both of us laughing. "This is it," he'd said. "This is the job that changes everything." I'd believed him. He threw himself into the firm the way I threw myself into building schedules, late nights, early mornings, saying yes to the worst assignments. At first I was proud. I'd show up at firm events in my one good dress and watch him work the room, shaking hands, making people laugh, dropping little self-deprecating jokes the partners loved. His family adored him. Of course they did. Charming, ambitious Ethan, who'd married down-to-earth Julia, who kept him grounded. His mother always squeezed my shoulder at holidays and whispered, "Thank you for taking such good care of him. He works so hard." Sometimes I wanted to ask, "Do you know I work 60 hours a week too?" But I didn't. The distance didn't arrive overnight. It slid in sideways, like fog. One more late night, one more client dinner, one more weekend prep session for a big case. At first, I chalked it up to the firm. Everyone knew Big Law ate people alive. Then small things started to itch at me. A cologne I didn't recognize on his shirt. A joke he made about associates who dress like they're on a runway, said with a smile that lingered too long. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about a brilliant colleague who just gets the politics here. "Who?" I'd asked once, casually. He'd shrugged, too casual. "Just people from work. You wouldn't know them." I tried to let it go. I told myself I was tired, paranoid, oversensitive. Then, 2 weeks before the Christmas party, I was doing laundry when I felt something stiff in the pocket of his dress pants. A folded receipt. Meridian Hotel. 2 glasses of champagne. 1 room, charged at 11:47 p.m. On a Tuesday. My chest went tight. I checked the date. It was the night he'd told me he was stuck at a client dinner that ran long. "Hey," I'd said that night when he finally came home, hair a little mussed, tie jammed in his pocket instead of around his neck. "How was the dinner?" He'd kissed my forehead without meeting my eyes. "Exhausting. I'm going to shower." The second receipt was worse. Different restaurant. Same hotel. Same mysterious credit card number that didn't match any account I knew about. I sat at our kitchen table under the harsh overhead light, receipts lined up like evidence in a crime drama. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped his phone when I picked it up. I'd never gone through his phone before. That night I did. It didn't take long. He wasn't even careful. A photo, time-stamped from that same Tuesday. Ethan in a crisp white shirt, no tie, smiling at the camera. A woman next to him, dark hair, red lipstick, leaning into his shoulder like she'd been there 1,000 times. 2 champagne flutes between them. The Meridian Hotel logo glittered in the background. My stomach flipped. Under the photo was a message from her. To second chances and finally getting it right this time. His reply, "You always were the one." I couldn't breathe. He came home 15 minutes later to find me sitting at the table, the receipts and his phone in front of me. "How was your day?" he'd asked, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door. I looked up at him, and for a second the words were right there, burning the back of my throat. Where were you really? Who is she? How long has this been happening? Instead, I heard myself say, "Fine, long. You?" He smiled, relieved, crossing the kitchen to kiss my cheek. "Same. I'm wiped." The next morning, he mentioned the office Christmas party over coffee. "There's going to be an event at the firm next week," he said, stirring sugar into his cup. "The big annual thing. But my ex from college is going to be there. It might be awkward if you came." I watched the cream swirl into his coffee like smoke. "Your ex?" "Yeah," he said too quickly. "She works in my department now. It's stupid, old history. I just think it'll be easier if you skip it. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. Like I hadn't already seen them, shoulder to shoulder at a hotel bar, celebrating second chances. "Of course," I'd said, my voice strangely calm. "I'll stay home." 2 hours later, while he was at work, my phone rang. "Mrs. Carter?" a male voice asked. "This is Jonathan Qley from Morrison & Associates." My spine straightened instinctively. "Yes?" "We've been reviewing candidates for a new regional director position overseeing our operations and litigation support," he said. "Your name came highly recommended. I was wondering if you'd be open to discussing a transition from construction management into corporate operations. We need someone who understands real logistics, not just spreadsheets." I stared at the receipts still sitting on the counter, at the photo burning in my brain, at the life I'd been breaking my back to hold together. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm very open to that." I didn't tell Ethan about the call, or the interviews, or the offer letter I signed 3 days later. He told me not to come to his party. So I came to mine. If someone had asked me a year ago whether I trusted my husband, I would have said yes without thinking. Ethan wasn't just my partner. He'd been my anchor, my sounding board, the person I imagined growing old with on some sunlit porch we'd argue forever about how to furnish. But trust doesn't implode in a single moment. It corrodes, slowly, silently, until the structure collapses under its own weight. And for months, little fragments of doubt had been piling up like debris. I kept sweeping into the same corner, pretending it wasn't forming a mountain. The shift in his voice. It started with his tone whenever he talked about work. There was a new lightness there, an eagerness I recognized but hadn't heard since the early days of his career, when he still believed ambition was enough to carry him through anything. "Clara's brilliant," he'd say casually after a meeting. "You should hear the way she handles the partners." Or, "She just gets the politics here in a way no one else does." Or the worst one, "You'd like her, Jules. She's got your confidence, but, I don't know, sharper." I remember smiling tightly, nodding, pretending it didn't sting that he was comparing me to a woman he used to love. Pretending it didn't matter that he'd never once said I had sharpness. Just steadiness, reliability, foundation. All the qualities you want in a blueprint, not a woman. The scheduling coincidences. Then came the late nights. At first, it was normal. Law firms don't sleep. But these weren't just late nights. They were patterned. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Always with the same client. Always ending just before midnight. He'd text me at 10:43 p.m. "Almost done. Don't wait up." But sometimes I'd still be awake. Sometimes I'd hear him fumble with the lock, whisper an apology, and head straight for the shower. The scent trailing behind him wasn't mine. Not his. Something floral. Expensive. Something a woman chooses when she wants to be unforgettable. His friends' tight-lipped smiles. Ethan's coworkers used to greet me warmly at corporate events. They'd tease him. "You married up, Morrison." But the last networking mixer I attended, months before the Christmas party, felt different. People still smiled at me, but there was a flicker behind their expressions, a shift in their eyes, like they were waiting for something, or wondering whether I knew. When I hugged his friend Michael hello, he stiffened just a little, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. "Everything okay?" I'd asked. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, of course, just tired." But he looked at Ethan then, with something like warning, or pity, or both. The phone he started guarding. Ethan had never been precious about his phone. It used to lie on kitchen counters, buried in couch cushions, left in the car console without a second thought. But lately he kept it face down. Always face down, screen locked, notifications silenced. When it buzzed, he'd swipe it off the table before I could even glance at the screen. Once I'd reached for it when it rang while he was in the shower, just out of instinct, to bring it to him. He'd leapt out of the bathroom dripping wet, grabbing it from my hand like I'd pulled the pin on a grenade. His voice was sharp enough to cut skin. "Don't touch my phone, Julia." I'd frozen. "It's just your phone." "It's private," he snapped. "Everyone deserves privacy." I'd stared at him, stunned by the panic in his eyes. Because that's what it was. Not anger, not irritation. Pure, instinctive panic. The kind people get when they have something to lose. The distance in our bed. There's a kind of silence that doesn't belong in a marriage. A heavy, humming thing that sits between your ribs when you're lying in the dark next to someone who used to be your safest place. Ethan and I had always slept tangled, my head on his chest, his arm around my waist, my leg thrown over his because I slept like an octopus claiming territory. But somewhere along the way, I'd started waking up alone. Not because he wasn't home, but because he'd rolled away, moved to his side of the bed, placed pillows between us like borders on a map. His back would be to me, shoulders stiff, breathing shallow. Sometimes I'd reach out just to touch his shoulder, to remind him I was there, but his body would flinch. Barely, a twitch, a recoil. One night I whispered, "Are we okay?" into the darkness. His voice floated back, "We're fine, just tired." But the space between us felt like an ocean. Cold, deep, impossible to swim across. The whispering gut feeling. People say intuition is just fear dressing itself up as wisdom. But real intuition, the kind that wakes you at 3 a.m., the kind that sits in your bones, comes from patterns you've already noticed but haven't admitted. By the time I found the receipts, I already knew. By the time I saw the selfie, I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. By the time he told me not to come to the party, I'd stopped believing anything he said. Something was wrong, rotten, growing like mold in the walls of our marriage. And yet, I still wasn't prepared to see him at that party, laughing with his ex, touching her like she belonged to him, like I never had. I wasn't prepared, but I was ready. There's a difference. One breaks you. The other rebuilds you. And that night, as the lights sparkled and champagne glasses clinked across the room, I felt something inside myself shift. Not collapse, not crumble, shift. The woman who had tolerated excuses and clung to trust like it was the only thing keeping her afloat. She was cracking open, making room for the woman who was about to walk onto that stage as Ethan's boss and finally stop pretending. If the universe ever wanted to stage the perfect cinematic betrayal, it chose the Morrison and Associates Christmas Gala as its stage, and my life as its script. The moment Mr. Qley stepped up to the microphone, the entire room shifted. Conversations softened. Champagne flutes paused midair. Employees drifted closer like moths to a flame. Even the ice sculpture seemed to glow brighter, refracting the tension. Ethan stood by the window with Clara, his ex, still laughing at something he'd said. Her hand was on his sleeve, fingers curled lightly, comfortably, like they had muscle memory of his body. He didn't pull away. He didn't even notice me. He was looking at her the way men look at women they haven't quite stopped loving. And then the microphone crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," Qley boomed, smiling with the satisfaction of a man who loved both power and surprises. "Before we begin tonight's awards, I'd like to introduce someone very important to our firm." My pulse picked up. Sophie beside me whispered, "Here we go." "Someone many of you haven't met yet," Qley continued, "but whose work ethic and leadership will shape our litigation operations for years to come." Claire's fingers tightened on Ethan's arm. He turned, curious, brows knitting. "And," Qley added, with theatrical flair, "some of you may already know her." A ripple passed through the crowd. A few heads turned, right toward me. Sophie nudged gently. "Take a breath. Own the room." So I did. I stepped forward. "Please welcome," Qley announced, lifting his glass, "our new regional director, Julia Carter." For a heartbeat, the entire room froze. Silence. Absolute silence. Then reactions hit like dominoes. A gasp from someone near the catering table. A choked noise from an associate who recognized my last name. A whisper sweeping across the room like wind. And then Ethan saw me. His jaw dropped. Color drained from his face so fast he looked like he'd been carved out of marble. His hand fell away from Clara's back. "Julia," he mouthed. Clara turned next, and her expression was a masterpiece. Shock, confusion, panic blooming under mascara and expensive highlighter. She whispered something to Ethan, but he didn't hear her. His eyes were locked on me with the expression of a man watching the ground open beneath him. I lifted my chin, hands steady at my sides. I didn't smile. I didn't acknowledge him. I stood where the light landed on me, not as his wife, not as the afterthought he left at home, but as the woman he now answered to. But before Qley could say more, another voice rang out, clear, sharp, and deadly sweet. "Before we congratulate Julia," Sophie said loudly, stepping forward like a prosecutor approaching the bench, "I think Chad would like to explain something." Gasps echoed. Employees turned. A circle formed. Chad, Clara's ex-boyfriend and Ethan's co-worker, stood near the bar, suddenly looking like a deer in front of an 18-wheeler. Sophie held up his phone. Not hers, his. "Would you like to tell everyone," she continued, each word slicing through the air, "why there are photos of you and multiple married women on here?" Another ripple of gasps. Clara stiffened. Ethan blinked rapidly, like he could physically deny what he was hearing. Chad lunged forward, too slow. Sophie swiped up, the screen lit with photo after photo. Now Chad, kissing a woman outside a hotel. Chad in bed, shirtless, with someone whose face was conveniently visible. Chad holding champagne with handwriting on the mirror behind him. Round 3? Employees murmured. Phones lifted. The room became a hungry crowd. Chad's voice cracked. "Sophie, stop!" But she wasn't done, not even close. "Or should we talk about the texts?" she asked sweetly. She scrolled. Dozens of messages. "Your husband will never know. Same room next week? Tell your assistant you're working late again." A woman near the paralegal team gasped loudly, recognizing her own photo. Someone dropped a champagne flute. It shattered. Chad lunged again, desperate, but Sophie stepped back with dancer-like precision. "You don't get to silence me anymore," she said. "Not after what I found." Then she hurled her champagne flute at him. It didn't hit him. It hit the $10,000 ice sculpture. The sculpture cracked. A massive chunk broke off, skidding across the table and crashing into the 3-tier cake. The cake toppled, smashing into the floor with a dramatic splatter of buttercream and sponge. Someone screamed. Someone laughed hysterically. Someone yelled, "Oh my God, is this on live stream?" And across the chaos, Ethan pushed through bodies, eyes pleading, voice cracking. "Julia, baby, please, listen." I didn't move. He reached for my arm. I stepped back. "Can I explain?" he whispered. I looked him straight in the eyes. "For weeks," I said calmly, "I've been waiting for you to explain." He froze. The crowd was silent again, hanging on every word. Clara stumbled forward, panic all over her face. "Julia, this isn't what you think." I turned to her slowly. "Oh, Clara," I said softly. "Don't worry." I glanced around the room, at the photos, the gasps, the spinning chaos. Everyone here seems to know exactly what's going on. Phones recorded. Mouths hung open. Even Qley looked stunned. And somewhere behind me, Sophie whispered, "That's your cue. Let it burn." I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need a scene. I simply set down my untouched champagne flute on the nearest table, carefully, deliberately, and said, "Let's see what the truth looks like in daylight." The crowd parted as Sophie and I walked to the elevators. Behind us, I heard Qley yell, "Clara, Chad, my office, first thing Monday." The elevator doors slid shut, and as we descended, Sophie exhaled shakily. "That," she said, voice trembling with adrenaline, "was beautiful." I leaned back against the wall. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something sharp and bright flicker inside me. Not anger, not sadness, power. And the night was only beginning. When the elevator doors slid closed, sealing off the chaos above us, the tension in my chest loosened, but only slightly. The truth had cracked open, but the fallout hadn't even begun. Sophie let out a breath she'd clearly been holding for too long. "I can't believe the look on Chad's face," she said with a shaky laugh. "He really thought he could juggle half the firm without consequences." I managed a faint smile, but my reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls told the real story. Eyes too bright, jaw too tight, posture too controlled. The truth was, I felt everything at once. Shock, hurt, rage, relief, sadness, numbness. Like my body couldn't decide which emotion to commit to, so it tried all of them at once. When we stepped out into the building lobby, Sophie touched my arm gently. You don't have to go home alone tonight, she said. If you want to decompress, come to my place, or we could grab coffee, or... Thank you, I interrupted softly, but I need to face him. She nodded, understanding instantly. Not everyone would have, but Sophie did. She was sharp in ways I respected, brave in ways I hadn't realized I'd need someone else to model tonight. Text me, she said before leaving. And remember, don't let him rewrite the narrative just because he's scared. I promised I wouldn't. The drive home. The night air outside was icy enough to sting my skin, grounding me. My car felt small and too quiet compared to the storm I'd just walked through. As I drove home, my mind replayed everything. His hand on Clara's back, the photo at the Meridian Hotel, the receipts, the lies, his voice telling me, "Don't come to the party." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The truth wasn't subtle, it wasn't complicated, it wasn't an accident. Ethan had made choices. Deliberate ones, painful ones, repeated ones. And those choices had finally come crashing down. The empty house. When I walked inside, the house was dark except for the glow of a lamp in the living room. Ethan was sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like a man waiting for a verdict. When he looked up, his face was a mess. Red eyes, tear tracks, hair mussed from running his hands through it. "Julia," he breathed, standing quickly. Please, can we talk?" I didn't answer immediately. I took off my coat, hung it neatly, slipped out of my heels. He watched me like a drowning man watching someone walk away from the shore. "Say something," he whispered. I finally turned. "I spent weeks waiting for you to say something," I said evenly. "And you didn't. Not once." He flinched. "I didn't tell you about the new position because I wanted to hurt you," he said. "I swear, I didn't know how to explain." "Yes," I cut in sharply. "That seems to be a pattern." He swallowed. "Julia, what you saw, what Sophie showed tonight, it's not what you think." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Don't do that. Don't insult both of us right now." He stepped toward me. I stepped back. His hands fell to his sides. "I made mistakes. I know that. But Clara, she was just..." "Convenient?" I offered. "Available?" He shook his head desperately. "No, it wasn't like that. We have a history, and things got complicated at work. I didn't plan anything. I didn't mean for..." "You didn't mean for the hotel receipts, Anaish," I said. "You didn't mean for the secret credit card. You didn't mean for the selfie at the Meridian. You didn't mean for the texts. You didn't mean for the way you touched her tonight." His lips parted. No sound came out. I continued, voice steady. "You didn't mean any of it. You just did it." He sank back onto the couch, face collapsing into his hands. "I was lonely," he whispered. "You were always tired, always busy. You stopped asking me how my day was. I felt like we were just roommates." My jaw clenched. "That's your justification?" I asked. "That's why you cheated? Because you felt lonely?" He lifted his head, eyes red. "I'm not saying it was right. It wasn't. God, Julia, I know I screwed everything up, but I didn't know how to talk to you anymore." I stared at him, a mix of anger and grief tightening in my chest. "Then why didn't you try?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me how you felt? Why didn't you ask for counseling, for space, for anything?" His voice broke. "I thought I'd lose you." The irony hit me like a punch to the ribs. "You didn't lose me," I said quietly. "You threw me away." He covered his face again. I stood there, looking at the man I'd once believed would be my forever, and realized something painful and simple. He wasn't capable of being the man I'd hoped he was. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. The silence stretched between us, heavy, exhausted. Finally, he whispered, "Can we fix this?" A trembling, fragile question. I took a long breath, measured, steady. "We'll talk," I said, "but not tonight, not like this." His shoulders sagged with both relief and dread. I walked past him, heading for the bedroom hallway. Halfway down, I turned. "One thing, Ethan," I said softly. He looked up. "You don't get to decide the story anymore. Not tonight, not going forward." Then I closed the bedroom door and let the latch click. A small sound, but absolute. And on the other side of that door, alone for the first time in a long time, I exhaled. A long, shaky breath. I wasn't healed. I wasn't okay. I wasn't even steady. But something inside me had shifted again. A tectonic plate finding a new alignment. For the first time since this started, the story didn't feel like it was happening to me. I felt like someone who could choose what happened next. And that was the most terrifying and liberating part of all. By morning, the internet had done what it always does. It devoured the scandal whole. Hashtags were trending. Clips from the party were circulating. Someone had slowed down the moment Sophie smashed her champagne glass into the ice sculpture and added dramatic music. And because the universe had a twisted sense of humor, I woke to 3 text messages from coworkers I barely knew. "Girl, are you okay? If you need a lawyer, I know someone. Your husband and his ex are done, like officially." Then the article notifications began. Local news, 2 gossip blogs, a viral Reddit thread titled, "Corporate Christmas Party Turns into Cheating Expose plus Cake Disaster, 10-10 Drama." My phone buzzed nonstop. His didn't stop either. But the biggest noise came from inside the house. The breakfast that wasn't. Ethan looked like hell, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, the kind of man who'd spent the night rehearsing apologies he wasn't sure would land. When he saw me enter the kitchen, he stood quickly. "Julia, everything is spiraling. People at the firm, clients, my friends, everyone saw the videos." He ran a shaky hand through his hair. "You embarrassed me. Not the cheating, not the lies, not the months of betrayal. Me. He blamed me." I stared at him, stunned at how effortlessly he shifted responsibility. "Ethan," I said slowly, "the only person who embarrassed you was yourself." He blinked rapidly, like the truth stung. He looked smaller in that moment, not physically, but morally. Like the illusion of who he thought he was had cracked, and he didn't know how to hold the pieces together. "Julia, please," he whispered, voice fraying. "I'm facing disciplinary review. The partners called at 7 a.m. Some clients are threatening to leave the firm because they think I'm a liability. And Clara..." I stiffened. "What about Clara?" "She's been suspended," he admitted, barely audible. "They told her not to come in. She blames you." A cold laugh slipped from my throat. "She blames me because I didn't stay blind?" He looked down, ashamed. "I don't know. I just know she's destroyed." Behind his words was something he didn't say, and he cared. Too much. The knife twisted deeper. "I didn't ask her to cheat with a coworker," I replied calmly. "She did that all on her own." He slumped into a chair, defeated. "We're both going to lose everything." I tilted my head. "No, Ethan, you might. I won't." Before he could respond, my phone dinged. A text from Sophie. "Phase 2 begins today. I'm outside." Dynamics at the office. Walking into Morrison and Associates as Ethan's boss was surreal. Whispers followed me down every hallway. People pretended they weren't staring, but they were. Phones tilted discreetly. Conversations paused when I passed. Mrs. Henderson, my new assistant, a silver-haired woman who had the energy of a retired judge and the eyes of a detective, handed me my schedule. "Your husband's situation," she said carefully, "has made this floor unusually lively. I'm assuming you're aware of the evolving chaos." "Intimately," I replied. She nodded like she approved of my restraint. "Good. Then you'll also be aware that Ms. Martinez is waiting in your office." I found Sophie sitting confidently in a chair across from my desk, a latte in her hand and a tablet in front of her, like she'd been prepping a courtroom presentation. "Chad's already unraveling," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "Security footage of Jennifer slashing his tires is circulating. Lisa is crying in the bathroom, and Clara tried to lock herself in a conference room." I blinked. "Already?" "Oh, honey," Sophie said, leaning back. "That's nothing. Wait until you see this." She slid her tablet across my desk. Evidence. Lots of it. Emails. Financial discrepancies. Hotel bookings. Text exchanges. All from Chad and Clara. Some from months ago. Some from years. "How did you get all this?" I murmured, scrolling through the mountain of proof. "I'm thorough," she said, "and angry." I looked up. "You're not doing this for me, are you?" She smiled wryly. "No, I'm doing it because he played me, and because she thought she was untouchable." She tapped her finger on one document. "This one shows misuse of client assets. This one proves they coordinated alibis. And this one..." She paused. "This one shows they used firm money for a romantic weekend in the Bahamas." I inhaled sharply. Years of deceit, layered, meticulous, hidden behind my own husband's lies. "Why are you showing me all this?" I asked quietly. "Because," Sophie said, sitting straighter, "you're the only one who can act legally without it being retaliation. You're their superior now, and someone has to clean up this mess." "And you want Chad's promotion," I said. She didn't hide it. "Of course, and I deserve it." I believed her, without hesitation. The wellness program. By noon, I'd authorized new employee wellness sessions. Mandatory. Frank, my old friend from the boxing gym, led them. Frank was not subtle. He was 6'4", solid muscle, and had the energy of someone who truly enjoyed motivational yelling. Chad nearly fainted doing burpees. His shirt clung with sweat, face red, hair plastered to his forehead. When I walked into the converted gym space, Frank grinned. "Your team is doing great, Julia. Chad here says he's in excellent cardiovascular shape." Employees snickered. Chad glared daggers. "This is harassment," he gasped, palms on his knees. "No," I said calmly, consulting Sophie's tablet. "This is policy. Section 4.7, supported by corporate health incentives." His mouth opened, closed, opened. He had nothing. His power was crumbling, like wet plaster without support. He just didn't know how to catch it. The partners' new tone. Later that afternoon, I met with Gleon and two partners for a brief update. "Ms. Carter," Gleon said, swirling his scotch, "your arrival has illuminated several issues." Margaret, another partner, added, "We've noticed remarkable productivity shifts since yesterday. Fascinating, really." They exchanged looks, calculated, interested, a little afraid. "Keep going," Margaret said. "Fix the culture, fix the misconduct, fix the liability, whatever you need." I realized then I had more power than I thought, not just in title, but in impact. And it terrified Ethan's department, especially those who knew the truth was cornering them. The evening message. At 5:00 p.m., just as I was gathering my things, Sophie texted, "Phase 3, Meridian Hotel Bar, 7 p.m. Trust me, this part is fun." Fun, right. But I went, not for revenge, though I'd be lying if I said that didn't play a part. I went to reclaim something of myself, my clarity, my dignity, my voice. And the moment I stepped into the dim, warm glow of the Meridian Bar, I saw him, Chad, alone in a booth, looking shattered. Sophie leaned in and whispered, "Watch this." What happened next would unravel him completely. And it wasn't illegal, or violent, or cruel. Just strategic, just deserved, just the beginning. The Meridian Hotel Bar was dim, all amber lighting and velvet shadows, the kind of place where secrets felt at home. When I walked in, the low hum of conversation washed over me, blending with the clink of glassware and the faint scent of citrus and expensive cologne. Sophie sat at the bar, one leg crossed elegantly over the other, swirling a martini like she owned the room. When she saw me, her lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "Perfect timing," she murmured, nodding toward the back corner. There, in a booth, half hidden by a curtain of faux greenery, sat Chad. He wasn't the confident, smug associate I'd seen at the office. He looked ruined, eyes red, tie gone, hair disheveled, sweating like the walls were closing in. The kind of man who had just realized the world isn't as charmed as he once believed. Sophie finished her drink, stood, straightened her blazer, and whispered, "Let me set the stage." I watched as she walked toward Chad, heels clicking with the calm precision of a woman who had nothing left to lose but enjoyed having the leverage anyway. The bar confrontation. I couldn't hear every word, but I saw everything. The way Chad's face tightened when he saw her. The way he tried to smile, then failed. The way Sophie leaned down, whispering something that made his eyes widen in dread. Then she pulled out her phone. She showed him something, and his expression collapsed completely. He shook his head, pleading. She stayed calm, impassive, lips curved in a razor-thin smile. And then she did the unexpected. She kissed his cheek, soft, slow, lingering. Not affectionate, strategic. A public display designed to confuse him, disorient him, and distract him, long enough for her nimble fingers to quietly slip something from his jacket pocket. His car keys. Sophie walked away, leaving Chad frozen in his booth like a man waiting for the final blow. My phone buzzed. "Sophie, level 3 parking garage, come alone." The parking garage. The warehouse district might have been quiet at night, but Meridian's garage was almost eerie. Echoes, flickering lights, and the stale smell of rubber and concrete. Sophie was already there, standing beside Chad's pristine BMW, wearing latex gloves and holding the keys like a trophy. "What are you doing?" I asked, half dreading the answer. "Psychological warfare," she said. "All legal, all clean, all devastating." She opened the driver's door and began her work. Removing the expensive floor mats. Adjusting the mirrors to absurd angles. Moving the seat so close to the wheel no human could fit. Reprogramming his GPS to take the longest, most congested routes in the city. Resetting all his radio stations to static channels. And then the pièce de résistance. A small remote she held up with a flourish. "What's that?" I asked. His nightmare, she said. She pressed the button. Beep, beep, beep. The BMW's alarm screamed through the entire garage, echoing like a banshee. Sophie tossed the keys under a random parked car and walked toward the elevator. Phase 3, complete, she said calmly. Now go home. It's time to deal with your husband. The real darkness. When I walked into the house, Ethan was waiting in the living room, sitting stiffly on the edge of the couch like a man awaiting sentencing. He still wore his suit from earlier, his shirt wrinkled, tie loose, eyes haunted. I thought maybe you weren't coming back, he whispered. I live here, I replied flatly. He ran a trembling hand over his face. The partners want to meet with me tomorrow, he said. They're talking suspension, maybe termination. Something sharp inside me twisted, not sympathy, not quite satisfaction, something darker, heavier. And Clara? I asked. She's terrified. She said the firm is turning on her, that people are calling her unethical, irresponsible, a liability. His voice cracked. She said she feels like her life is falling apart. And? I asked quietly. And I don't know what to do, he whispered, breaking. Julia, I'm losing everything. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who had once made me feel understood, cherished, chosen. Now shaking, unraveling, drowning in the very chaos he created. Something inside me broke open, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full weight. Not just betrayal, not just hurt, not just anger. Loss. Real, heavy, suffocating loss. The loss of the life we'd built. The version of him I'd believed in. The future I thought we were heading toward. You chose this, I whispered. He squeezed his eyes shut. I know, and I don't know how to fix it. I walked to the doorway, putting distance between us. You can't fix something you spent months breaking, I said. His breath hitched. I'm sorry, he said, voice cracking. I didn't realize how far it had gone. I didn't know you were hurting. I stared at him, numb. How could you not know? I asked. He had no answer. So I delivered the truth he needed to hear. I'm not your anchor anymore, Ethan. I'm not your audience, your safety net, or your afterthought. I'm not here to cushion the fall you created. His shoulders sagged, defeated, broken. And for a moment, a brief, devastating moment, I felt the weight of how deeply I had loved him. That was the darkest part. Not the betrayal, not the lies, not the humiliation, but the truth that the person who once felt like home had become the person I needed to escape. When I closed the bedroom door behind me, the click echoed like the final note of a requiem. And in that quiet, I realized this was the exact moment my old life ended, and a new, terrifying, liberating one began. The next day didn't arrive gently. It hit like a storm. By the time I reached the office, the building was vibrating with energy. Fear-driven, rumor-soaked, electrified. People moved in tight clusters, whispering in frantic, clipped tones. Others avoided eye contact altogether, as if acknowledging me meant stepping into the blast radius. But the real shift happened the moment Mrs. Henderson met me at the elevator with her signature steely calm. They're waiting for you, she said. In your office, both of them. My stomach sank. Who? I asked, though a part of me already knew. She paused, lips tightening, with something like sympathy. Your husband, she said, and Clara. Of course. It wasn't enough for them to cheat in the shadows. Now they wanted to talk in fluorescent lighting and legal carpeting. I squared my shoulders. Let them wait. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. When I entered my office, they were sitting apart on opposite sides of the room. Ethan hunched forward like a man seeking absolution, Clara rigid and defensive, arms folded tightly across her chest. They both stood when I walked in. Julia, Ethan began carefully, we just want to explain. Sit, I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Ethan sat immediately. Clara hesitated, jaw tight, but followed. I walked behind my desk, calm, composed, collected, exactly the opposite of how they looked. Before either of you speaks, I said, understand that nothing you say will justify the choices you made, but if you want to explain, go ahead. Clara was faster to speak than Ethan. This is spiraling out of control, she snapped. The partners suspended me. 3 clients pulled their accounts. I've been advised to get a lawyer. Good idea, I said. You'll need one. Her nostrils flared. You think you're innocent in all this? She demanded. You humiliated us. You escalated everything. A small laugh escaped me. I escalated nothing, I said. I simply stopped pretending. Ethan leaned forward. Jules, please, he begged. I'm losing my job. I'm losing everything. Can we just talk without anger? I stared at him for a long moment. You didn't want to talk when I asked what was bothering you, I said softly. You didn't want to talk when you stayed out until midnight. You didn't want to talk when you hid a secret credit card. You didn't want to talk when you slept with your ex. He winced. Clara's eyes flickered. You only want to talk now because the consequences finally arrived. Silence filled the room like thick fog. Then, knock knock. Come in, I called. Sophie entered, composed, smiling, holding a thick folder and a tablet. Clara stiffened. Ethan swallowed hard. I think it's time, Sophie said as she set the folder on my desk. Time for what? Ethan asked quietly. For the truth, she replied. The evidence wall. Sophie tapped the tablet. The screen lit up the wall behind me, projected with everything she had spent months collecting. Emails, receipts, hotel logs, GPS tracking, unauthorized reimbursements, client account inconsistencies, a timeline of 2 years of betrayal and misconduct. Clara paled. Ethan covered his face with his hands. Sophie's voice was calm and sharp. This is a full record of your affair, not just the recent months. 2 years. Clara blinked rapidly. That's a lie. We weren't. Sophie clicked again. On the screen. Bahamas Resort check-in. 2 years ago. Guests. Chad Morrison and Clara Bennett. Charge to Morrison and Associates. Client entertainment budget. Ethan turned to Clara, betrayal cracking his features in real time. You told me you were done with him, Ethan whispered. You said it ended 5 years ago. It did, Clara stammered. That Bahamas trip meant nothing, I swear. Sophie kept going. This, she continued, is the lunch you expensed at La Mer. This is the hotel suite you reserved during work hours. This is the Uber Chad took leaving your apartment at 2:14 a.m., 3 nights a week. Every slide was a punch. Ethan's voice choked. How long has this been happening? Clara's lips trembled. I don't know. 2 years, Sophie answered coldly. At minimum. Clara whipped toward me. You're enjoying this, she spat. You're taking pleasure in destroying our lives. I leaned forward, voice soft but lethal. I didn't destroy your life, Clara. You did. I'm just holding up the mirror. The unexpected invasion. Before anyone could speak, footsteps thundered outside the office. Then the door burst open. Chad, flanked by 2 security guards, sweaty, pale, unhinged. He pointed at Sophie. You! He shouted. You set me up. You hacked my phone. You staged everything. Sophie raised an eyebrow. No, Chad. I simply stopped covering for you. He lurched toward her. The guards grabbed him. Let go, Chad yelled. This is all retaliation. It's... Sophie clicked one last document onto the screen. Chad froze as he saw it, his face drained of all color. A spreadsheet detailing every falsified reimbursement, every fraudulent client charge, every unauthorized use of firm funds. The number at the bottom, 200,000 plus. Clara stepped back like she'd been slapped. What is that? She whispered. Sophie answered plainly. Your financial crimes. The breaking point. Chad shook his head wildly. No, this can't Enough, I said. Everyone stilled. I stood, my voice steady and firm. The partners know everything. There's an emergency meeting tomorrow, and both of you, I looked at Clara, then Chad, will answer for what you've done. Clara's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of a chair. Ethan looked shattered beyond repair. Julia, he whispered, what happens to us now? I looked at him, not with rage, not with grief, but with clarity. What happens now? I repeated. And for the first time, he seemed to understand. We weren't us anymore. Not after the lies, not after the betrayal, not after everything that came to light. His eyes filled with tears. Please don't leave me, he whispered. But I wasn't his to lose anymore. I stepped toward the door. I already did, I said, and walked out. Behind me, the room erupted into chaos. Shouting, crying, phones ringing, the collapse of everything they'd built on lies. But I didn't look back, because the turning point wasn't the evidence on the screen. It was this. I finally chose myself, and I wasn't going to stop. The next morning, the building felt different. Not tense, not chaotic, electric. But it wasn't the kind of electricity that hummed with possibility. It was the kind that crackled just before a storm tears the roof off. Reporters circled outside the revolving doors. 2 camera crews waited by the sidewalk. Employees swiped into the building with their heads down, avoiding eye contact, like the ground might swallow them if they acknowledged reality. The firm that once spoke in polished smiles and manicured professionalism was now holding itself together with tape and hope. And everyone, absolutely everyone, knew why. The partners' emergency meeting. When I reached the 34th floor, Mrs. Henderson met me holding 2 coffees and a look that could only be described as grim satisfaction. They're ready for you, she said. The executive conference room was packed with senior partners, not just the usual polished, composed, legal titans. This crowd looked wrecked, hair disheveled, ties crooked, makeup smudged from stress. Qley gestured toward the only empty seat. "Julia, sit." I did. Margaret Rothschild, the managing partner, steepled her fingers. "We need to discuss damage control." Her voice was tight, clipped, and vibrating with controlled fury. "What kind of damage?" I asked calmly. Qley snorted. "The kind that costs us accounts, reputation, and possibly our professional licenses." Margaret tapped a thick folder. "Your husband and Miss Bennett created a spectacle last night that is already circulating nationally." Another partner added sharply, "And you orchestrated a public humiliation that destroyed 2 careers and made this firm a laughingstock." Before I could respond, the doors opened again. Sophie walked in, calm, confident, holding her tablet like a loaded weapon. "Actually," she said, "Julia saved your firm." The room froze. Margaret blinked. "Explain." Sophie connected her tablet to the wall display. A full financial audit popped up, rows and columns of transactions. Then she clicked. Up flashed. Unauthorized expenses. Fraudulent reimbursements. Client funds. Diverted hotel charges, romantic travel. Billed to corporate accounts. Altered invoices. The partners collectively inhaled. "Over the past 2 years," Sophie said, "Chad Morrison and Clara Bennett embezzled over $200,000 from client funds." Gasps. "Additionally," she continued, "Chad has been involved with at least 6 women in this firm, 3 of whom are preparing sexual misconduct claims." Another murmur rippled. "And they plan to leave the firm," she concluded, taking several high-profile clients with them. They used the relationship drama as cover to avoid scrutiny. Silence. Cold. Stunning. Crushing silence. Margaret finally spoke. "How long have you known?" Sophie didn't flinch. "I investigated for months. I only needed Julia's authority, and last night's broadcast, to ensure the evidence wasn't destroyed." One partner whispered, "Good God." Qley rubbed his temples. "So you're saying the scandal would have been far worse if we hadn't caught this now?" "Yes," Sophie said. "Your firm would have collapsed under federal investigation." All eyes turned to me, and for the first time I saw it clearly. They didn't see me as Ethan's wife anymore. They saw me as the woman who saved their careers. Margaret exhaled shakily. "Ms. Martinez, we'll be speaking to you regarding a promotion." Sophie nodded, hiding her smile. "And Julia," Margaret continued, "you have our full support as regional director. This department is now yours to restructure." I simply answered, "Understood." 30 minutes later, I was in my office when the elevator chimed. Security escorted Ethan and Clara inside the building. They looked like ghosts. Clara's hair was disheveled, no makeup, wrinkled clothes, hands trembling. Ethan looked worse, eyes hollow, steps dragging, suit unkempt like he'd slept in it. My phone rang. "Julia," the receptionist said, "your husband is here. He wants to speak with you." I hesitated. Then, "Send him up." He walked into my office slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal or a judge. He sat down without asking. His voice was barely audible. "They're pursuing charges." I nodded. "I know." "The FBI wants to interview me. Chad implicated both of us." I held his gaze. "Did you participate in the fraud?" "No," he said quickly. "Never. I didn't know what they were doing." I raised an eyebrow. "Ethan, you were in meetings with her every day. You had access to the same accounts. You approved expenses. You signed documents." His voice broke. "I was stupid. I was in love with her." The final crack tore through the last remnants of what we were. It still hurt. A cold, deep, unexpected hurt. One that settled behind my ribs. He looked up, tears gathering. "Julia, I'm so sorry." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. He stared as I placed it in front of him. "Divorce papers," I said. "I've already signed." He went pale. "What about the house?" he whispered. "Keep it," I said. "It's not my home anymore." "And you?" he asked, voice trembling. "Are you staying here, in the firm?" "For now," I said. "Someone has to clean up the mess." He swallowed. "For what it's worth," he whispered, "you were a better wife than I deserved." I didn't respond. He stood slowly as if his bones hurt and walked to the door. "Julia," he said softly. "Yes? Do you hate me?" I thought carefully. Hating him would mean I still gave him power. "No," I said quietly, "but I'm done hurting because of you." He nodded, eyes red, and left. The door clicked shut. Moments later, Sophie entered, confident, glowing with well-earned authority. "They offered me Chad's position," she said. "Congratulations," I replied. She smiled. "Thank you. And Julia, I have some ideas for restructuring the entire litigation department. Ethical procedures, safety, training, culture shift. I returned her smile. We'll rebuild this place, I said, properly. She nodded, eyes bright. Good, she said. Because you and I, we make a hell of a team. After everyone left, I sat alone in my corner office. The city stretched below, hundreds of thousands of lives moving forward, unaware of the seismic shift that had taken place inside this glass tower. My phone buzzed. It was Frank from the boxing gym. You did it, he said, laughing. You burned the whole thing down and walked away clean. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the weight lifting. My marriage was over, but so was the deception, the lies, the silence, the settling. I stood at the window. Watching the sunset bleed across the skyline, I realized something simple and powerful. I survived them, and I wasn't going back. 6 weeks later, winter finally loosened its grip on the city. The snow melted into thin ribbons along the sidewalks. The air softened, and for the first time in months, I felt the warmth of sunlight on my skin without flinching from the memories it illuminated. Life hadn't returned to normal. It had simply become mine again, and that was enough. Clara and Chad's downfall wasn't spectacular anymore. Not loud, not viral, not explosive. It was slow, embarrassing, inevitable. The firm had terminated them both. Law enforcement had begun a formal investigation. 2 clients filed civil suits. 3 women from the firm retained attorneys for hostile work environment claims. The glamorous version of them, the one they curated with champagne selfies and expensive hotel receipts, was gone. They were no longer the golden employees who charmed everyone. They were cautionary tales whispered about in hushed tones. The kind people referenced when they said, "Did you hear what happened at Morrison & Associates?" And Ethan, he didn't vanish, he unraveled. He signed the divorce papers quietly, without argument. He moved out of the house, taking only a suitcase and the guilt he couldn't shake. Sometimes he sent long, emotional emails he never had the courage to send while we were married. Apologies, regrets, explanations I no longer needed. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, out of closure. Even wounds heal if you stop reopening them. My new life. The firm changed too. Sophie stepped into her new role with brilliance and fire. She implemented safeguards, training programs, accountability systems. She didn't just climb the corporate ladder, she rebuilt it. And I discovered I was good at leadership in a way I had never expected. Not controlling, not punitive, not vengeful. Firm, fair, clear. Employees stopped whispering when I walked down the hallway. They started nodding, greeting me, asking my opinion, requesting meetings to discuss improvements. They didn't see me as the scorned wife anymore. They saw me as the woman who held a crumbling system together long enough to rebuild it. My corner office began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a place I belonged. One Thursday evening, long after sunset, I stayed late to finish budget reviews. Sophie poked her head into my office with a mischievous smile. "Come on," she said, "we're grabbing dinner. And no, you can't stay buried in spreadsheets. That's an order." We ended up at a small rooftop restaurant with string lights and warm blankets draped over the chairs. Sitting across from her, listening to the city hum below us, something shifted in my chest. Not romance, not attraction, just ease. Friendship. The kind that forms through shared battles and mutual respect. "You know," Sophie said softly, swirling her wine, "you handled all of this with more grace than anyone could have expected." Grace, not anger, not vengeance. Grace. I didn't feel graceful, I admitted. "You didn't have to feel it to be it," she said. "You took a nightmare and turned it into a new beginning." I looked at her, a small smile forming. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just stopped letting people walk over me." She clinked her glass against mine. "Same thing." 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not from Ethan, not from Clara, from the court. Divorce finalized. Clean, simple, done. I held the papers for a long moment, not in sadness, but in gratitude. Some endings are not losses. Some endings are doorways. I walked outside and stood on my porch, breathing in the crisp air of a life finally free of lies. A neighbor walked by, waving. The world kept moving. So did I. People think betrayal destroys you. It doesn't. It reveals you. It strips away the pretend, the excuses, the blind optimism, until all that's left is who you really are. And I discovered I was stronger than the woman who cried at kitchen tables over receipts. more capable than the wife who tried to hold together a marriage that was already in ashes, more deserving than the version of myself who thought loyalty meant self-sacrifice. I rebuilt my life, not from revenge, not from spite, but from clarity. If you're watching this video on YouTube right now, maybe you're going through something similar. Maybe you feel small or lost or betrayed. Maybe your life feels like it's falling apart in ways you never expected. Here's what I want you to know. You can survive anything that was meant to break you. And sometimes the moment everything collapses is the moment you finally find solid ground. Healing isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It isn't instantaneous. It's quiet. It's subtle. It's choosing yourself in small ways, day after day. Don't cling to someone who doesn't choose you. Don't shrink to fit inside a life that doesn't honor you. Don't mistake familiarity for love. You deserve honesty. You deserve loyalty. You deserve to be seen, not as an accessory, not as an afterthought, but as a whole, powerful person. I ended a marriage, but I began a life. One I won't apologize for. One I won't compromise again. One I'm finally proud of. And wherever you are right now, whatever you're facing, I hope you choose yourself too. Because that's when the real story begins, not when someone betrays you, but when you decide you're worth more.